So I hope you had enough latkes and enough. Chanuka. So in the daily prayers and in the Birkat Mazon, we insert a prayer called Al Hanisim, wherein we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the miracles of the time. This prayer is inserted both on Chanuka and on Purim. And the Chanuka version recounts the story of Chanuka, and the Purim version recounts the story of Purim. But there's a very subtle difference between the two. In the Purim version, we tell the story of Purim. Mordechai and Esther, days of Mordechai and Esther, Shushan Habira. Haman rose against them, wanted to destroy the Jews. And God, in His great mercy, nullified Haman's counsel and frustrated his intention. And what he wanted to do to Mordechai came back upon him. And Haman and his sons were hanged on the gallows. And that's the end. In other words, the Al Hanisim of Purim makes no mention of the fact that Purim was ordained as a holiday. It just tells the story. Right? That Haman wanted to annihilate the Jews, he wasn't successful, he ended up getting punished himself, and that's the end. That's the end of the prayer. When it comes to the Chanuka version, which we've been saying already for over 2 days, so it tells the story that the Malchus Yavam, the kingdom of Yavam, wanted to force the Jews away from the Torah, and there was a great battle, and God fought on our behalf. And it says that after the successful war, V'yacha came after that. The Jews came back to the temple. They cleared out the sanctuary, the tier was Mikdashecha, and they purified the holy place. The Ikuneros, they lit the lamps. When they established the 8 days of Chanuka, in order to praise God's great name. So the Al Hanisim of Chanuka doesn't just tell the story of Chanuka, it also makes reference to the fact that Chanuka was ordained as a holiday. So this is a very subtle difference. That, again, in the Al Hanisim of Purim, we hear the story, but that Purim was established as a yontif, that's not mentioned in the prayer. When it comes to Chanuka, there's an emphasis on the idea that not just did we succeed in our battle against Yavan, but the sages at the time declared Chanuka as a day worthy of celebration. So we have to understand, why is there this difference in emphasis? Now this difference in emphasis, by the way, is not only in the Al Hanisim, the two versions of Al Hanisim. As we know that when we light the candles, Chanuka, we sing or recite, if you're not a singer, the most sur. And to me it would seem that other than the fixed prayers that we say in shul, the most sur is the most universally accepted piyut, poem. No other poem, not the Zmiras of Shabbos and not the piyutim of Yom Naroim, is as widely accepted as the most sur. The most, of course, recounts many events in Jewish history. It recounts our liberation from Egypt, and it recounts our liberation from Babylonia, our surviving the threat of Haman, the story of Chanuka. All these are recounted in the stanzas of the most sur. Now, when it comes to the verse that talks about the Purim story, there too it says, Karais kaimas b'reish bikesh, that Haman wanted to cut down the stature of the b'reish, the cedar tree. This is a reference to Mordechai. Agagi ben Hamdasa, the Agagite, the son of Hamdasa, that of course is Haman. And this became a stumbling block for him. The Gavasonish Basa, and his haughtiness was annulled. Rosh, meaning Nisesa, you uplifted the head of the member of the tribe of Binyamin, that's Mordechai. Va'oyev Shmo Machisa, and the enemy, you blotted out his name. Rov Bonov the Kinyanov al Ha'etz Talisa, and Haman along with the sons was hanged. And again, that's where the stanza ends. There's no reference to the fact that Purim was declared to be a holiday. The stanza just tells the story. We come to the next stanza, which talks about the story of Chanuka. So again, Yevarim Nikvetzu Alai, the Greeks gathered around me, against me. Azai Bnei Chashmanim, in the days of the Chashmonaim. Ufartzu Chamos Migdalai, they breached the walls of the temple. V'tzimu Kol Hashmanim, and they defiled all the oils. U'minaiser Kankanim Nasanes L'Shoshanim, and from the remnant of the jars, that one jar that was left from all the jars that were sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, Nasanes L'Shoshanim, a miracle was performed for the roses. This is a reference to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is called the Shoshana Ben Achochim. It's a rose among the thorns. B'nei Bina Yimei Shmeina, men of great insight. 8 days, Kavu Shir Urinanim, they established as days of song and praise. So here too, again, the same thing. When we talk about Purim, all we say is the story, right? And the last words of the Purim stanza refer to the fact that Haman and his sons were hanged in the gallows. And when it comes to the Chanuka stanza, again, the same idea. That it's not just a retelling of the story, but also that people of great bina, great intelligence, great insight, they establish these 8 days of Chanuka as days of song and praise. So again, the same difference. That why is it in Purim we don't make a big deal out of the fact that it was ordained as a holiday. When it comes to Chanuka, that's something which is emphasized. Now in the Alanisim, there's something extra which is emphasized, which is the fact that the sages who ordained the holiday are called Bnei Bina, people of tremendous insight. Bina means to understand the corollaries of a proposition. The word Bina, Rashi says in Chumash, is Mevin Dover Mitach Dover. If you understand what a proposition entails, that is called Bina. Whereas to know a lot of propositions, that's called Chochmah. And if a person knows a lot of facts, we call him a Chacham. It's knowledge, Chochmah. But there can be people who understand all the propositions, but don't understand what follows from those propositions. In other words, what do you derive from them? How are they to be applied? That already is something else. It's called Bina. Bina is understanding. Mevin Dover Mitech Dover, from something to understand something else. So it's not just Chachamim who ordained Chanukas, but Bnei Bina. People had tremendous insight. They were able to understand exactly what was in front of their eyes and extend it and elaborate upon it and develop it. And they ordained Chanuka, which implies something more than we saw in Alanisim. It isn't just that we emphasized the fact that Chanuka was ordained, but it seems that it wasn't so obvious. It wasn't so simple. It wasn't a no-brainer. It only was a function of tremendous insight and understanding. We have to make Chanuka a yontif. Now the truth is that if we go to the source material, the familiar source material for the stories of Chanuka and Purim, we see exactly this in an amazing way. If you look at Megillah Esther, the story of Purim, it says in the Megillah that year, the year of the great battle, on the 13th of Adar, so the Jews spontaneously celebrated the next day. The next day, the day after the battle, was a spontaneous day of joy and feasting. And in Shushan, where they fought for 2 days, on the 13th and the 14th, the 15th was a spontaneous day of feasting. The next year, it says, V'kibeh ha'Yehudim eis asher hechelu la'asos. The Jews accepted upon themselves to continue that which they already had begun to do. And I think that in this class we already mentioned the very magnificent Ramban, that the Ran brings a Maseches Megillah, who learns these psukim. The last chapter of Megillah Esther, really the next to the last chapter, chapter Tes, is that chapter. By that point in the Megillah, everyone is itching to go home. But But the Ramban interpreted the verses so magnificently and makes a point of this, that the Jews spontaneously observed Purim, the year of the victory, and it was the next year, they accepted upon themselves to continue that which they already had begun to do. In other words, that the spontaneous celebrations of the year before should be continued onward. So again, it seems that it really was a no-brainer. It didn't take Chachamim, let alone Bnei Bina, to ordain the holiday of Purim. The people, the people on their own understood that a victory like that calls for a celebration. So the very next day, there wouldn't have been time for there to be a command issued from a central religious authority. We're talking about a very wide empire of Achashverosh, but in every place, in every city, the Jews are known and understood. After a victory like that, you have to celebrate. Comes the Gemara in Shabbos, and the Gemara in Shabbos tells us the Chanuka story, and it tells us that the Chashmonaim overpowered the Greeks, and they entered the temple. L'shana acheres, the next year, the next year, they declared these days as a holiday, that means that the year of the miracle, there was no celebration. There was no spontaneous celebration.
They were still fighting the war a year later.
No, we'll see in a second. We'll talk about that. Right? There was no celebration immediately. It was a year later the Chacham understood that these were events that are worthy of celebrating. So it seems that there's a very big difference. So when we understand this difference, why is it that Purim is a spontaneous celebration, why Chanuka required this insight, we'll understand that's obviously why in the prayers, both the Mos Surah and the Al Hanisim on Purim, there's no emphasis on the ordinance of the holiday. It's really a no-brainer. Of course you celebrate. And Chanuka, this is part of the prayer because it's a chidush. It's something novel. It's something unexpected. Something that people of lesser intelligence might not have realized or understood, that this is something which calls for a celebration. The answer is really very, very simple. Purim celebrates something which is not particularly Jewish. It celebrates being alive. Now, of course, it's a Jewish holiday because it's the Jews that were threatened. But what it celebrates is not something which is particularly Jewish. I mean, everybody is happy to be alive. So if it was some other nation that was threatened, undoubtedly, if they would have been saved, they would also make a celebration. But it's not a particularly Jewish thing. It's an affirmation of life. As we were threatened with annihilation, we survived the threat. Baruch Hashem, not only did we survive the threat, we were able to utterly vanquish our enemies. That should be a cause for celebration is not surprising at all. To be alive is glorious. I remember I heard a story once. Someone told a story that he was in a store, and he noticed that the storekeeper was a very, very happy person, like just radiated joy. And to the extent that you just felt compelled to ask him, like, why is he such a happy person? So the person said, because I'm alive. So the questioner said, we're all alive. Why are you especially happy? So he mentioned that there was a plane that crashed, and he had a ticket for that flight, and he missed his flight, and now he appreciates being alive. Because we don't appreciate our being alive because we haven't faced death. But if a person faces imminent death and is spared, then just being alive is glorious. So that's exactly what Purim is all about. As Purim, the Jews understood that there was a threat of annihilation, we were spared. We have to celebrate that. Chanuka is really a Jewish celebration. It celebrates our ability to resist shmat. That Jews were threatened with having to give up their religion under threat of death. The Yevanim made decrees against the core observances of circumcision, Shabbos, maintaining the Jewish calendar. They defiled the temple. And we were able to resist that. We won the temple back. We were able to light the menorah, despite the fact the oil was defiled. Right? It's something which is much more subtle. It's not so obvious at all that it's a cause for celebration. And the Sfas Emes says an even more amazing thing. He says that Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the refuah before the makkah. Generally, HaKadosh Baruch Hu prepares the cure before the illness. We see this in many, many instances. HaKadosh Baruch Hu lays the groundwork for what we need for our ultimate survival. So Sfas Emes says like this. He says that Chanuka gives us the ability to resist, gives us the strength to resist abandoning our religion at the point of a sword. Was it needed at the time? Or was it presumed that all Jews would have had that ability? Says the Sfas Emes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu prepared the refuah before the makkah. He gave us the celebration of Chanuka first to build us up before we needed Chanuka. So at the time, the sages felt it was just superfluous. It wasn't something new. It wasn't something necessary. It says whatever lessons Chanuka comes to teach us, everybody knows. Everyone certainly would have the fortitude to put them into practice. So, like, what are we celebrating? There's nothing that Chanuka adds to our Jewish life. But the drop over the next year was so precipitous that by the time 1 year passed, the B'nai Bina, these people of great insight, understood how Chanuka was needed, how necessary it was. And then they ordained it as a Yom Tov, as a holiday. And that's why that's the emphasis in Al Anisim and the Moas Tzur, that these people of tremendous spiritual insight ordained Chanuka. But the point I'm making is like this, that when we talk about Purim versus Chanuka, Purim celebrates something which is not particularly Jewish. It's to be alive. It's to survive. And everyone has to live. And everyone wants to live. Jewish, non-Jewish, whatever nationality, whatever ethnic group you belong to, everyone wants to live. Everyone can understand the Purim. So Chanuka is something which is very, very, very Jewish. It is a celebration of that which makes us unique, that which makes us special, our relationship with Ribono Shel Olam, our ability to resist any threat, to violate that relationship. It's something which is very, very, very Jewish, if you will. And I think that this distinction between, let's call it a generic celebration and a Jewish celebration, really is a theme which is really at the root of our parsha this week, Parshas Miketz. And let's discuss a very, very serious issue. It's relevant to last week's parsha, this week's parsha, next week's parsha, all these weeks. It seems that the fundamental question, is that within the structure of Klal Yisrael, who should be preeminent? Who should be the holder of the position of king? Because Yosef's dreams indicate, at least to himself, that he's the king. He has a dream that all the sheaves of the brothers are bowing down to his sheaf. He has a dream that the sun and the moon and the stars are bowing down to him. He's meant to be preeminent. He's meant to be the leader. He shares these dreams with the brothers. The brothers certainly get the message, because that's the brothers' response. Well, you think you're going to be the king? Hamaloch Timloch Aleinu? Do you mean to be the king? So obviously the brothers got the message loud and clear. They rejected it. but they understood exactly what Yosef was proposing. And according to Chazal, the brothers had a different idea of who should be king. They looked to Yehuda as being king. So how did it unfold? Whereas in last week's parasha we saw that in the aftermath of the sale of Yosef, the brothers turned against Yehuda. Vayered Yehuda me'es Echav. Yehuda descended from his brothers. And they began to point fingers, and they said, it's all your fault. Since you were our leader, if you would have stopped us, we would have not sold Yosef. And it's your fault. But what it really means is it's a failure of your leadership. It's a failure of your leadership. If you were a leader, you should have taken charge, and you should have set us straight, and you didn't. And Yehuda departs his brothers in shame, and there's a whole episode, and he gets married, and he has children, and at this point we don't know what's going to become of those children, but we know, through our blessed hindsight, that these are the children that ultimately are the progenitors of Malchus Beis David, of the royal line of Mashiach. But at this time, Yehuda was kind of marginalized. And who does rise to a position of kingship? So Yosef. Yosef becomes the viceroy of Egypt. So anybody reading the parsha would come to the conclusion that whose vision was correct? Yosef's. And the vision of the brothers that Malchus would be vested in Yehuda was wrong. Comes Yaakov Avinu on his deathbed, and Yaakov declares, Lo Yosur Shevet mi Yehuda, that the scepter of kingship shall not depart from the tribe of Yehuda. In other words, that the brothers were right all along, that Yehuda is meant to be the king, not Yosef. Yosef also gets very warm blessings, but kingship is awarded to Yehuda. And this is a bit of a mystery, because as the story unfolds, you certainly will get the impression that the vision of Yosef was correct, and the vision of the brothers was incorrect. By the way, I'll just mention that this blessing of Yaakov, Yosef Shevet Yehuda, has relevance to the Chanuka story. Because we know that the leaders of the revolt against the Greeks were Kaihanim. Right? The Maccabim, the Chashmonaim, were Kaihanim. And they established a kingdom led by priests. And it lasted for quite a long time, but ultimately they all were wiped out. The Gemara of Babasar tells us how Herod, Hordus, Avda the Beis Chashmonai Haba, he was a servant, he was a Gentile slave in the house of the Chashmonaim, and he rebelled against his masters, and he wiped them all out, every last one, and he usurped the monarchy for himself. But it was a terrible calamity that apparently the Chashmonaim were just wiped out. So why did that happen? I mean, they were the leaders at the time of the Chanuka story, and they restored monarchy, and they cleansed the temple. Why should such a fate come to them? So the Ramban writes in Parshas Vayechi, She'ovru al Tzavo HaZokein. They violated the will and testament of the elder Yaakov. The Yaakov said that Malchus should be vested in the tribe of Yehuda, and they took it for themselves, even though they were members of the tribe of Levi, and therefore they met their fate. It was an interesting thing. But this much it says in the Chumash, that Yaakov awarded Malchus to Yehuda. So the question is that didn't events indicate otherwise? So we have to understand that what is the kayach, what is the strength, what is the unique quality of the Malchus of Yosef, and what is the unique quality of the Malchus of Yehuda? Maybe if we go to the end of time, we'll be able to, in retrospect, understand things in the beginning of time. Now, the Gemara tells us, Masechah Sukkah, that we all believe in Mashiach. But it comes out from the Gemara, there are two Mashiachim. There's Mashiach ben Yosef, there is an anointed king who will come from the seed of Yosef, and there's Mashiach ben David. Mashiach ben Yosef will be killed, and then Mashiach ben David will rise to a position of leadership. What are their roles? What does Mashiach ben Yosef do, and what does Mashiach ben David do? Now, the picture that emerges from many Sfarim is this, that at least in one scheme, all the work, all the geopolitical work will be carried out by Mashiach ben Yosef. He will gather the exiles, and he will resettle them in Eretz Yisrael, and he will develop the economy, and he will build the infrastructure. And we have a vision of a thriving settlement in Eretz Yisrael under the leadership of Mashiach ben Yosef. And this settlement will be attacked by a coalition of nations. This is the Mulchemes Gog uMagog. This is the great Armageddon, so to speak. And in this war, Mashiach ben Yosef will be killed. The enemies will be defeated, but he will die in battle. And his successor will be Mashiach ben David. Now, what does that mean? It seems to mean the following, that if you want a person to perform the generic functions of kingship, to lead battles, to develop an economy, to settle a state, to build roads, buildings, and so on and so forth, you want to go with Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef. He has the qualities of leadership which are necessary to perform those generic functions of government. But once those are provided for, what type of leadership do you need to bring the nation to its spiritual ideal? That's Mashiach ben David. Because Mashiach ben Yosef can carry things up to a point. When Mashiach comes, when Mashiach is meant to come, so there's a lot of geopolitical work that has to be done. It's not just a question of doing tshuva, and not just a question of saying Tillim and davening and finding a nice esrog. You know, we have to have an army, we have to have a military, we have to have an economy, we have to build buildings, we have to pave roads, provide for the defense, and so on and so forth. Well, the person you want to go with is Mashiach ben Yosef. He says, once the nation is settled, the infrastructure is developed, now the question is, okay, so we are a nation like any other nation. You know, we have a military, we have an economy, we have secure borders, and so on and so forth. But what makes us Jewish? As an aside, I'll mention, this was the root of the very famous debate between the Chazon Ish and Ben Gurion. You may know a very fantastic episode that in the early days of the state, so Ben Gurion wanted to understand, the first prime minister wanted to understand that what makes the Haredim tick. So he decided that he would visit the leader of the Haredish Yidden, who the Gadol Hador was the Chazon Ish. So he sent a message, he'd like to visit the Chazon Ish. Now, the Chazon Ish could have said, but listen, there's no point having such a meeting. But the Chazon Ish said, listen, my door is open. Whoever wants to come, I don't turn anyone away. You want to see me? You're welcome to come.
Even you can come.
So Ben Gurion came to visit the Chazon Ish. And the meeting was conducted, you know, there's a saying in Hebrew, ba'arba einayim. It was conducted with 4 eyes. That's the expression. When it's face to face, no one else is there. So it's ba'arba einayim. It's 4 eyes. The meeting of the Chazon Ish, there were no witnesses, no staff members. It was just Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish. But there were reports subsequently of what was said from both sides of it. And Ben Gurion made the argument that we've accomplished so much, and why are the Haredim so opposed to our efforts, and so on and so forth. Why don't they give in? Why aren't they more flexible? So Chazon Ish said over a Gemara. The Gemara says like this: imagine you have a narrow road. You have a narrow road, and there are wagons coming from each direction. And the road is only narrow enough for one wagon to pass. So the question is, which wagon should go to the side of the road and which wagon should continue? So the Gemara says we have two wagons. One is tu'una, one is full, it's laden, and the other is empty. So the empty wagon should move to the side, let the full wagon pass. So the Chazon Ish says, our wagon is full. In other words, it's full of Torah, it's full of tradition for hundreds of years. It says, your wagon is empty. And therefore, if the question is who should step aside, it's not the Torah Jews who should step aside, it's the secular Jews who should step aside. That's what the Chazon Ish said. Ben Gurion went into a rage. He says, what do you mean? Our wagon is empty. Our wagon is empty. But he didn't understand. The Chazon Ish was saying something very, very deep. He's saying like this. Ben Gurion once said that the enterprise of the Jewish state will be complete when we have our first Jewish convicts in a Jewish prison. That's what he said. What did he mean to say? He meant to say that the Zionist enterprise is to build a state. And it has to have all the features of a state, of a generic state. It has to have airports, it has to have stores, it has to have prisons, it has to have policemen, it has to have convicts in the prisons that the policemen put in there. That's what it has to be. The Chazon Ish said that's only up to a point. That's only the foundation, it's only the beginning. It says the tachlis, the objective, is not merely that we should have a state of Jews. By the way, halavai, that our current leadership should understand even that we should have a state of Jews. That itself would be a tremendous advance over the current state of affairs. But the Chazon Ish said, but it's more than that. It has to be a Jewish state. It has to be informed and infused with values of Torah. And therefore, the wagon that we possess is the full wagon. Your wagon is empty. It's a wagon. I'm not denying it's a wagon. It's a wagon. But it's an empty wagon. It's a wagon that has to be filled with value which is unique to the Jewish people. So supposedly Ben Gurion went out and said, what do you mean it's empty? We have a symphony and we have this. Of course there's a symphony. But every country has a symphony. France has a symphony, and Italy has a symphony, and Russia has a symphony, United States, Canada, everybody has a symphony, many symphonies. But that's not what makes us a Jewish state. Maybe a symphony is necessary for a generic state. A vanilla state has to have, in addition to a prison and the police and the hospitals and the military and the economy, it has to have a symphony too. Right? You wouldn't want to have a country without a symphony. Says, but that's not what makes us Jewish. That's what makes us a Jewish state. Says that's what the Chazon Ish said. Says Yosef was the expert in building a state, and he was. What the proof is, you see what he did in Egypt. He built a state, but that wasn't a Jewish state. That wasn't a Jewish state. Who can make a Jewish state? Yaakov came to understand that's Yehuda. How did he know that? Because he knew it in an amazing way. Yosef had a dream of kingship, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought it about. That how was that dream realized? Not that Yosef took a leadership position among the Jews, but rather specifically in Egypt. So from that Yaakov understood it must be that the role of Yosef is in generic kingship. And therefore, if Egypt needs a king, he'll be the king of Egypt. But in Jewish kingship, it's Yehuda. And therefore, in Mashiach's time, it will be exactly that way. The initial steps, which are the generic steps, we also need, right? Now, I got to tell you something funny. There's a Gemara in Psachim, which says, Oy le'ir shirasheha talmidei chacham. Woe unto the city whose leaders are talmidei chacham. Why is that woe? It's pashut. If you had a city whose mayor was a Talmud Chacham, you'd have Tilim, you'd have Tfilas, you'd have mitzvahs galore. Would there be no roads? No buildings, potholes everywhere, no electricity, right? You need people that can build a city. Then, on top of that, you have the Talmidei Chachamim who will provide the spiritual aspects to it. But if you have a city that's run by Talmidei Chachamim, it's a disaster. It says, Oily Ish Rosh. This is, by the way, not a drush. That's what the Gemara is talking about. It says, you need people that can run a city. Right? After the city is established, now you have the Talmidei Chachamim to infuse it with Torah values, with Jewish values. That's a beautiful thing. But you have to have a city. You have to have a country. It says, then you bring in Mashiach ben David to direct the country to its spiritual calling. But first, who's going to build the economy? Who's going to build the military? Who's going to build the roads? That's Mashiach ben Yosef. Yes, question.
So it seems that Mashiach ben Yosef already came, and we missed it. There's a resettlement. You
should know, this may be. No, the Vilna Gaon, there's a sefer from the Vilna Gaon, really a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, called Koil HaTor. Very, very interesting sefer. It's about Mashiach ben Yosef, an entire sefer. And the Vilna Gaon takes this position that Mashiach ben Yosef is not necessarily a person. It may be a historic era, which has certain characteristics, and it may be that we are currently living and already have lived through an era which is characterized by Mashiach ben Yosef. This is not, what you're saying is not a far-fetched thing. The Vilna Gaon held this. The Vilna Gaon promoted settlement of Israel back in his time in the 1700s, and he considered that part of the mission of Mashiach ben Yosef. He even saw himself as being integral to this. We know that the initial Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael was founded by Talmidei Hagra among Talmidim of the Baal Shem at the same time. So what you're saying is not far-fetched. But this is the idea. Now, I'll prove this to you. An amazing thing. When the great schism in Malchus took place, the great division, after the death of Shlomo HaMelech, so Shlomo HaMelech's son, Rechavam, was the successor. And there was a complaint. What was the complaint? What were people complaining about? Not enough korbanos? Not enough tehillim? Not enough Jewish values? What were they complaining about? What was the complaint about? Taxes. Taxes. It's not just now that we're debating the fiscal cliff. Or, I shouldn't say we, I'm an American, so, south of the border interests me. But in those days, taxes were also an important issue. Taxes were too high. So they come to Rechav and they say, listen, you lower the taxes, you'll have our vote. Now, in America, it's the exact opposite. In America, if you promise to raise taxes on the 1%, you'll have our vote. The 99% will vote to raise the taxes on the other guy. But I think the tax system in Rechavim's time was much more equitable, meaning there was a flat tax. Everyone was equally taxed. So therefore, you raise taxes, it affects everybody, not just the 1%. Not just the billionaires who make $250,000 a year. Everybody's affected. So they complained. So the question was what to do. So Rechavam was the first modern politician. He didn't decide on the basis of what he felt was right or wrong. He took a poll of his advisors. And he had two groups of advisors. He had the old advisors who advised his father, and he had young friends. And he asked them what to do. So the old advisor said, give in, give in. You'll give in, you'll have the people, then later you can raise taxes. Which sounds so modern. Just give in for now, and then after the election, you'll change things. And the young ones said, you got to show who's boss. You got to show who's boss. And Rechavam liked that. That appealed to his hubris. And therefore he says, you think my father was tough on you? I'm going to be even tougher. So they voted with their feet. And 10 tribes broke away, and they established a kingdom under a man named Yerovam ben Nevat. Yerovam ben Nevat was a descendant of Yosef from the tribe of Ephraim. And he was able to hold 10 tribes. That Rechavim could hold even 2 tribes was a miracle. But Yerovam was able to hold 10. And it's an amazing, amazing thing. That means that the vast, vast majority of Klal Yisrael felt that in the administration of the state, Yerovam, who is the descendant of Yosef, is superior to Rechavim, who is the descendant of Yehuda.
Wow.
But what happened on the spiritual side? Not to say that the record was perfect. The Malchei Yehuda had their ups and downs. But at least every so often you had a tzaddik like Asa, Yehoshaphat, Chizkiyahu, Yoshiyahu. He had Rishonim too. So he had tzaddikim. But the Malchei Yisrael, one after the other, without exception, were all totally wicked. Some of them were more wicked than others. But they all were idolaters. Every last one. Which means that in terms of the generic functions of government, right, being able to run a state, to run an economy, they were obviously superior. Right? Nobody left. None of the tribes left. Right? The 10 tribes remained faithful to Malchus Yisrael. But in terms of spiritual values, Jewish values, total write-off. Right? Malchus Yehuda, not as successful in the generic running of the state and the economy, says, but in terms of Jewish values, much more successful. You might ask the question, so why was it that the 10 tribes were exiled and the 2 tribes were spared when Assyria attacked? That's a mistake. It says Assyria should have crushed Yehuda. But what happened was that Yehuda had a special schus. That when Assyria exiled the 10 tribes and was on the verge of conquering Yehuda, and the city of Yerushalayim was besieged, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent a message to Chizkiyahu, who was the king at the time. He says, "V'ganaisi al yir hazaris, I will protect this city, l'ma'ani, for my own sake, l'ma'an David Avdi, and for the sake of David, my servant, because this is where the Beis Hamikdash is, and therefore I will spare it this time." So it was spared from Assyria miraculously. The Assyrian army was wiped out at the gates of Yerushalayim, and then Chizkiyahu made a colossal error in befriending Bavel, a massive geopolitical error, which of course led ultimately to the Churban, and so on and so forth. So he received a temporary reprieve only to botch it up and ultimately bring calamity. That means that in terms of Malchus, government, statecraft, says Yosef has it hands down. But Jewish-wise, says that's Yehuda. And therefore, in Yemos Mashiach, you'll have the 2 Mashiachim. Mashiach ben Yosef will set things up, but it'll be Mashiach ben David who brings things to its perfection. Now, this is really the question. The question in our parsha is that as Jews, we really live on 2 levels. We live as all nations live. And that means we work and we play and we develop an infrastructure and an economy and a defense and so on. We do all the things that every other nation does. That's not it. That's not where we end. Right? Our nation is not just meant to be another nation except populated by Jews. It has qualities, it has characteristics, it has ideals, it has a mission, it has an objective, which is different. To use a Greek word, a telos. There's an end goal, which is different. That's why we are not just the Jewish Poland, or the Jewish France, or the Jewish Mexico. Right? We are a nation, yes. We are a country like every other country. We have everything every other country has. We have roads, and we have farms, and we have buildings, and we have an economy, and we have the symphony too. But we're meant to be more than that. Right? We are meant to be infused with the values of Torah, spirituality, a connection to the Ribono Shel Olam. Right? That's why, by the way, it has to be Eretz Yisrael. In other words, if it only was that Jews needed a generic state, it could have been anywhere. And that's why in the Second Zionist Congress, when the proposal was made for giving the Jews Uganda, why start up with the Arabs? Let's give them some place where they can start up with the people who live in Uganda. I'm sure that, I don't know what they thought, that the people in Uganda would be more accommodating than the Arabs. But let's give that to them. So there were people that held that was a good idea. Herzl himself thought it was a good idea. He says, but Baruch Hashem, there were those who understood that it can't be somewhere else. It's not just we need a vanilla, generic state. He says, our national ideal is more than just having a state. It's a connection with Ribono Shel Olam. That's specifically Eretz Yisrael. It can't be anywhere else. It has to be this place. And that's what it's all about. But this is really the question, the whole question of Parshas Miketz, Vayeshev, Miketz, Vikash, Vayechi, all these Parshas is exactly this. It says, of course, Yosef is the man. If you want a government, you want food, you want a defense, you want to build an economy, you want statecraft, Yosef is the man you turn to. There is no one as wise and as skilled and as clever as him. But if you want that the state should not just be a state of Jews, but a Jewish state, then you have to have the Malchus of Yehuda. That's what Yaakov Avinu gave in this Tzavah, Lo Yoser Shevet Mi Yehuda. And it's intriguing that the Lo Yoser Shevet Mi Yehuda, the qualities that Yehuda brings, are not just superior to those of Yosef, they are even superior to those of Levi. And that's the tremendous chiddush of the Ramban. See, I think that you might ask on the Ramban, it's always tempting to say, okay, so the Ramban says this, so what do the Chashmonaim think? Play that game. But it would seem like this, that the Chashmonaim thought like this. Of course, Yaakov Avinu was taking Malchus from Yosef and giving it to Yehuda. Because he held in the realm of spirituality, Yehuda is the superior to Yosef. So the question in Yaakov's time was Yosef versus Yehuda. Lo Yoser Shevet Mi Yehuda. But we're Shevet Levi. It says we are the spiritual leaders of the people. We're the priests. Certainly Yaakov would say, Kal v'chaimer, certainly so. Our kingship is even better than Yehuda. It says no. There was some spiritual quality of Yehuda that it's hard to define what that is, but makes his Malchus better able to achieve the spiritual goals of the nation, even than that of Shevet Levi, even that of the Kohanim.
But doesn't he have one specific quality that he's famous for?
Which is?
It's a recognition of being flawed.
That may be. That may be. But I don't know, that we have to explore. But
it seems to be his outstanding quality.
That could be. I'm just pointing out this one thing, that the Havamina, what the Chashmonaim thought, right, is not so outlandish. In other words, they thought that Yaakov Avinu was debating the merits of Yehuda versus Yosef.
But they seem to like this quality.
That could be. And therefore they held that giving Malchus to Shevet Levi would not be a violation of Yaakov's Tzavah. Obviously, history says the Ramban shows that they made a mistake. But this is really the question. Purim is a celebration which would be fit for any nation in the world. Because any nation which had the historical experience of facing annihilation and surviving would make a Purim. And I don't know, I'm not an expert in the folk holidays of the world. But I wouldn't be surprised if there are nations which, in their early history, had experiences which would cause them to celebrate their very existence and survival. Right? Now, of course, we are Jews, and we are religious Jews, and we are devoted to Ribbono Shel Olam, so maybe our Purim celebrations are a little different. I'm sure that anybody who's been to a real Purim Suda understands that it's not the same thing as a New Year's party. That I'll tell you. But what it celebrates fundamentally is nevertheless something that can be appreciated by anybody. It doesn't relate to the Jewish state as much as it relates to the generic state. We survived, we celebrate our survival. Therefore, it's a no-brainer, it's obvious, it's simple, it can even be spontaneous. There's no need for B'nai Bina, people with tremendous insight to ordain it. This Chanuka relates to something which is very, very, very Jewish. That we have a connection to the Ribbono Shel Olam that we will not give up for anything, whatever the threat is, whether it's at gunpoint or the point of a sword. We are not going to give up that kesher, that link to the Ribbono Shel Olam. There is nothing which is more precious to us. That's something which isn't so obvious. It's something that many people would not want to celebrate. Because who wants to celebrate our having the fortitude to give up our lives when necessary? To celebrate our survival is one thing. And to celebrate our ability to be moser nefesh, to give up our lives, and that's what we're learning from Chanuka. In the story of Chanuka, there's a little bit of a distorted picture that people get. People think that when the Chanuka story took place, the war was won. So the war wasn't won. The war in Yerushalayim was won. We took the city of Yerushalayim back, we restored the temple. But the Greeks were still dominant throughout the country, and there was a battle for the observance of the religion, to keep the faith, which went on and continued 4 years. Right? Chanuka wasn't the victory. It wasn't that the battle was over. It was that Chanuka gave us the strength to continue. In other words, you see that we were victorious here. You see that God didn't abandon us. You see that God sent a miracle to enable us to light the menorah. Now we know we have the strength to carry on. But that ensuing battle involved sacrifice. It involved many deaths. It involved casualties. So Chanuka is not so much the celebration of a victory over Yavin, it's a celebration of our having the ability to continue the battle, the confidence to continue the battle.
It's a big difference between that and Purim.
That should be a cause for celebration is not so obvious at all. That's only B'nai Bina. Only people of great understanding could appreciate that. But it's not just that we're celebrating our victories. We're celebrating our ability to carry the fight forward. That's a tremendous, tremendous thing. And that's why I think that it seems to me that the Jews in the following centuries, Chanuka perhaps was more poignant and spoke to them more than Purim did. Because Purim was a victory, so of course we tell ourselves in the same way we were victorious then, we're victorious now. So Chanuka is not a celebration of a victory, it's a celebration of the ability to battle on. Our readiness to sacrifice, our readiness to give up. And that, alas, has been the lot of Klal Yisrael for many, many centuries since the Chanuka story. It seems that we've always found ourselves in these situations where our ability to practice Judaism and live as Jews has been threatened, and there's always been Mesiras Nefesh, there's always been sacrifice, and the inspiration to be able to carry on has been the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashmonoim and the Jews of those times. So that's why I think that the differences are very, very, very hard. We live in a time that also calls for tremendous Mesiras Nefesh. It calls for a sacrifice. Baruch Hashem, not that type of sacrifice. We don't have to sacrifice our lives. Baruch Hashem, we have to thank the Hashem every day we live in places that we are free. to practice our religion, Baruch Hashem, Halavai, should continue for many years to come. But, nevertheless, we are giving things up. Because we are alienated from the mainstream of society. Somehow, if we live Jewish lives, when we raise our children to be Jewish in Jewish ways, we feel we don't belong. We feel foreign. We feel estranged. We feel we are not participants in the popular culture and what is going on around us, and we're looked at as being somewhat odd and different, and maybe even a little bit aloof. It's uncomfortable. Much rather would be in the mainstream, doing what everyone else is doing and participating in the amusements and so on and so forth. And we all want to go to the Super Bowl because if there are 80,000 people there, like, why shouldn't I be part of that? And if I'm not going to be there, at least I should be part of the who knows how many tens of millions at least watching it on television. But the reality is that's not our place. It says, Hein Om Levadad Yishkai. Klal Yisrael is a nation which always lives apart. Let me tell you an amazing thing. On this pasuk, Hein Om Levadad Yishkai. Hein Om Levadad Yishkai. Bilam said these words. Klal Yisrael, behold, is a nation which dwells apart. Very strange word, Hein. Hey Nun. Hein Om. Behold the nation. So he says like this. He says a fantastic thing. He says, that the letters in Hebrew have numerical values. So the first 9 letters have values of 1 through 9. So you can match pairs of numbers to equal 10. If you match Aleph and Tes, the numerical value of Aleph is 1, of Tes is 9, so add Aleph and Tes, you get 10. Beis and Ches. Beis is 2, Ches is 8. Add them up, you get 10. Gimel and Zayin. Gimel is 3, Zayin is 7. Match them up, you get 10. Dalet and Vav. 4 and 6. Match them up, you get 10. Hey has no partner. To get 10, you have to match Hey with itself. 2 Heys, that equals 10. Now when we go to the next set of letters, you can match up pairs of letters to equal 100. Yud and Sadi come together because that's 10 and 90. Chaf and Pei is 20 and 80. Lamed and Ayin is 30 and 70. Mem and Samach is 40 and 60. Come to Nun, Nun is 50. Who does it pair up with? Only with itself. So Hey and Nun are odd letters. They pair with themselves. Hein behold a nation. Hein, Hey Nun, behold a nation. Levadad Yishkain, that dwells apart. Right? The quality of Klal Yisrael is that it doesn't join anything. Right? It may find itself among others, but never joins with anything. Any chemists here? Any chemists? Think of the noble gases. Right? The noble gases, neon, xenon, argon. These gases don't form compounds with other elements. Whereas you can mix them with other elements, but they will not form chemical bonds with them. That's Klal Yisrael. But Klal Yisrael is Hein Om Levadad Yishkan. It's a nation which dwells apart. You can take Jews and plunge them in the middle of France, or in the middle of Poland, or in the middle of Brazil, or put them anywhere in the world. But if the Jew is faithful to his Jewishness, he just doesn't blend. He's a noble gas. That name, noble gas, is an important thing, because that was considered a sign of nobility. You're an unwillingness to mix and blend, and you stay apart. It's not because you're noble, you're special, right? We are the noble gases of the world. We don't blend, we don't mix. But that causes discomfort. We feel estranged, we feel different. That's the type of mysterious nefesh that we have to practice. But that's what Chanuka is the inspiration for. Is it a cause for celebration? Some people wouldn't think so. So they've had to totally redefine Chanuka. So if you read the newspapers, they will tell you Chanuka is the Jewish Christmas. Or Chanuka is the potato festival. Whatever they tell you. And I don't know. But whatever they tell you, it's an astounding thing that I think when the papers give you the recipes for Pesach, they pretty much accurately tell you what Pesach is about, right? And what Purim is about. But Chanukah they always get wrong, because the message of Chanukah is really a message which is certainly distasteful for the Ummah Sa'ilam, but I think is distasteful for many Jews as well. He says, but we have to hear it. We have to hear it, understand it, absorb it.